Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in. As always, I am Kaylee Batesman, the Content Director at She Can Code. Today on our podcast, we're going to discuss some of the positives regarding diversity in the tech sector. We've all seen and read the depressing statistics about gender equality and diversity in tech. While more clearly needs to be done to make it more inclusive, today we'll be looking at what the industry has already achieved and how we can use this groundwork to get more women into tech roles. Now, joining me today, I have the fabulous Jinny Mitchell-Kent, Chief Operating Officer at Great State. Welcome, Jinny. Lovely to have you with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for taking the time this morning to come in and have a chat. Can we kick off with a little bit about your career journey so far, please?
Yeah, sure. So I guess going back to the beginning in terms of like education and stuff, I did a media arts and English degree. And once I graduated, started to look for a job and really sort of fell into digital, if I'm honest. I'd done video editing as part of my degree and assumed I'd get a job in TV. So started looking at BBC and Endemol and places like that. Very quickly realised that might not be feasible. Pretty hugely competitive, not many roles coming up. And at the time I wasn't interested really in moving to London. So a production coordinator job popped up at what was then E3 Media Agency. That's what Great State used to be called before we rebranded. I went for it. I don't think I even really knew digital jobs existed before that. University didn't particularly prepare me for what roles were possible, I don't think. But I started at E3 or Great State in 2005, at which point the agency was about 30 people. And it was a really nice balanced mix gender-wise from my point of view. We had a small development team with a really strong, impressive female developer at the time and several women in senior level positions. So I just assumed that was normal. And it was only as time went on really that I realised how male dominated the industry was. I progressed fairly quickly within E3 from production coordinator to account manager, which was a hybrid project and account management role. After about 3.5 years there, I decided to move to London and I joined AKQA as a project manager. And that was really an exceptional place to work. I learned an incredible amount and it was a really big shift in terms of scale from E3. But in terms of pace of work and the challenge and things like that, E3 had given me a really good grounding. I progressed from project manager to senior and then into sort of program management roles, managing increasingly large and complex programs of work and bigger teams. And by the time I left AKQA, I was head of delivery and operations for London. And I'd been commuting back and forth to London from Bristol for a few years by that point. And after having my second child, I really wanted to work closer to home. Although now how the pandemic has changed things and it's a very different, setup, but at the time it wasn't like that. So I decided to freelance for a bit once I worked back in Bristol and see what options, existed there. So I joined Great State as an operations consultant to help with efficiency and profitability challenges that, existed at the time. And after a 9-month stint, I was made COO on a permanent basis.
I think that's a great journey to hear. And what was interesting, right at the start, you said that you studied media and arts and then you ended up in digital. Did you, you must be creative at heart. Did you think that the digital industry was going to be creative, or did you sort of have that stereotype? And it sounds a bit boring, but perhaps when you went for the roles or started talking to people, it was very different.
I think that, throughout my degree and things, I realized I quite liked the practical application of media. So, different video or photography, and I got to do all of those things. I don't particularly think of myself as a very creative person, but I like to facilitate creativity. So actually, some of my projects at university were very organizational based. So I realized I could organize stuff. I was able to sort of manage things, projects and things like that. And it was only really when I read the jobs spec for the production coordinator that I was like, oh yeah, I can do those things. I've just done those things. I didn't even know that was a job, that could be done. But actually, in my degree, I did enjoy, we did a little bit of web development, it was Dreamweaver back then. I wouldn't like to do any coding whatsoever. But I found it really fascinating. I didn't consider that to be a boring job to do. It was just opening up a world that I didn't really know existed. I think I started to use the internet, when I was in secondary school, towards the end of secondary school, and I just the world didn't exist in my head, if you know what I mean, that was jobs and an industry, and you could make money from doing that. So
yeah.
it's lovely.
And even the jobs that didn't exist as well at that time, like you said, even yourself, you're not aware of the jobs that come up because they change so often as well, and you didn't quite realize until you read the job spec, actually there is a job there for me that I do all of this. Yeah. Which obviously is very challenging about the tech sector, because it does change very fast and people don't always understand how suited they are to certain roles.
Yeah, definitely. And there's just a lack of information, I think. Well, certainly there was when I was at school and university and things. If it wasn't the more traditional careers around, I don't know, being a doctor or a teacher or a lawyer or whatever, there just wasn't any real information. And that was for me in a school and education system where I was pretty privileged. I can only imagine the kind of information that people get if they're in maybe an area of disadvantage, and just the complete lack of it. And maybe, it's better than it was when I was at school, but I don't get the impression it's progressed as much as it could.
Yes, yeah. And it's just seeing those roles as well, isn't it? Somebody coming in and talking about it, for instance. Having started your career at Great State in a junior role, you returned as COO. Do you have any advice for rejoining a company you've worked at previously?
I'm all for it, to be honest. I think it can be challenging at times to be seen as more senior by some people when you've essentially grown up in a company. And it can help to step away and get a bit more experience and exposure and then come back. And that maybe helps to shift the mindset of people around you. I would say it's not always an issue. I've also experienced kind of fast track promotions where the shift is just accepted, and that's wonderful. And I guess I do my best to behave in that way with my teams and reward based on, merit and performance rather than just how many years experience you have or age or whatever. I think coming back into a company you've worked at before can feel quite strange in my experience. So when I rejoined Great State, it felt both very familiar, but also quite alien. Although I knew several people who had been here when I was first here, they were still here. That was great. There was this whole raft of new people, and the agency was actually a very different place. It worked in a different way. My advice, I guess, is to not overthink it. Take it as it comes, kind of roll with it, draw on your experience and be yourself. You don't need to reinvent the wheel or yourself when you come back. You just have to have confidence in the new skills and expertise that you gained while you were away.
Yeah, I think we've all had that thought, haven't we? Would I go back to a company that I really liked? What if it's changed and the people have changed? I think the main thing there is just if it had a great culture, I think that probably isn't going to change too much. And as you said, from that point, maybe just don't overthink it. I worked at an American company that had a really lovely culture about it. And then sometimes I think to myself, oh, would I go back? The people are very different. But then you just sort of think, well, the core of it is still there. They're still very successful. And the team, have a great way about them. So, it must have seemed very strange stepping back in and thinking, well, how am I going to go about this? Or did you know some of the people still, or was it all completely?
Yeah, no, definitely. I knew. So we've got some really long-standing employees, 20 plus years. So there was a nice core group that I still knew: the managing director, the founder, the technical director, the client services director. So there were some very, familiar, lovely faces around me, which was wonderful. I think I was a very different person, and I'd had a huge amount of experience in the meantime. So I felt really kind of confident coming back in. And I wasn't coming in to do a very similar role that I'd done before, which helps, I think, if you are, is immediately you're positioning yourself in a different way. And but you're right in terms of the culture and the sort of ethos of a company. I think you have to look at the reasons why you left the company in the first place and whether those things still exist, or whether, you know, things have changed, or it's just you wanted to develop different skills that you didn't think you could get there, whatever those reasons are, and then decide if you know, going back is the right place. I think if I'd have done it, you know, 5 to 10 years earlier, it would have been the wrong thing to do. I would have felt like I was going backwards, but it just didn't feel like that after, you know, everything else that I'd done.
Yeah, and if people are there for the long haul as well, that always bodes well with a company, doesn't it? That people want to stay, and that company is really good at retaining them. If it's somebody with a revolving door, then you think I'm definitely not going back to that company.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, yeah, valid.
So obviously, you know, you've been through quite a career and quite a journey so far. How has the tech industry changed during your career, do you think?
So I feel like generally it's just grown up a bit. So digital is now a maturing industry. You know, when we started out, it nearly everyone involved, I think, was young, single, without kids, and there was a real work hard, play hard mentality. I think it's just a bit more balanced now as our personal situations have changed, and we know that there needs to be much more understanding and facilitating of that. You could maybe argue that as more men have started to be involved in things like childcare and family commitments, and things have ended up being more balanced there, this issue maybe has been pushed a bit higher up the agenda as it's directly impacting men. Would that have been the case if it was an issue that just impacted women? I don't know, to be honest. But either way, I think it really highlights why it's so important to have, you know, male allies for women in the industry and help shift the status quo of you know, what's gone before. I think there's also a level of maturity in how technology is used. So more of a focus now on, you know, betterment rather than using tech, you know, or innovation for sort of gimmicky reasons. I think organizations consider tech more strategically and creatively now, which, like you kind of alluded to before, it brings the need for a wider range of technical skills and expertise, and so therefore more role opportunities, which might be more appealing to women. I imagine there's still not enough awareness of the depth and the scope of roles that you need within a digital agency. And as you said, it's always evolving. So we could do more there, I think, to kind of get that out there. You know, technology itself has just changed massively. There's a load more programming languages, platforms than existed before, or at least, you know, that I was aware of. When I first started out, you know, there's far less bespoke CMS builds these days, thank God. You know, there's technology that exists that you can just implement. It allows us to create, you know, amazing solutions with really complex tech, but they're really seamless and simple for the user in a far, far better way than we were ever able to do before. So that's, you know, that's amazing. I think there are also new ways of working. Agile methodologies being far more prevalent than when I first started out, as an example. And those sorts of things help facilitate more collaborative ways of working and the ability to show value to clients more quickly. So it's definitely progressed, you know, massively in the right direction from my point of view.
Yeah, and you touched upon the pandemic a little bit earlier, and just how that accelerated all of those things that were kind of there already, weren't they? Things like the working from home, but I don't think any of us felt very comfortable as well, depending on the workplace. I was working at a company at the time, and every time if I needed to be at home, for instance, taking a delivery, and I say, can I work from home? I always felt like the team might be thinking, oh, you know, Kaylee's working from home today, she's not doing anything, because we were so used to everybody in the office. But when everybody went home, you know, that pressure disappeared, and all of those, everything just becomes so much easier, as you mentioned, for parents, and just for the way that you work as well. You touched upon agile working there. Everything just became so much easier and so much more flexible for everybody because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think, you know, as an industry, we should probably have been further progressed than we were before the pandemic hit. And I think that, it says something about the culture of an organization as well, about whether there's enough trust there in your staff and in you know, their ways of working, about whether they're, you know, people are comfortable with having you work from home. I think it would probably
feeds into that maturity, actually, that you said earlier. It's just trusting you to do your job.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it's helped push forward some real kind of archaic industries, which is great to kind of get things on slightly more even playing field. I think it was a learning curve for lots of people, and when we were going into lockdowns and stuff and everybody was working from home, everybody was learning together, which was great. We had some women come back from maternity leave. They literally went off in like the February of 2020, and then they came back a year later, and we'd had a year of, you know, essentially working from home. And that was a real challenge for them, as challenging as it is anyway, coming back from maternity leave to work, to figure out. We'd all figured it out together, how to work like this and be fully remote, and how you'd use Teams, for example, because we weren't using that huge amount before, and give them a bit more training and encouragement, and, you know, take them through the process that we'd gone through a little bit. But it definitely proved how much you could do without being face to face. I do think there are some negatives to it. I certainly, from a personal perspective, find it hard to separate home and work when I work from home too much. So I do like to come into the office a little bit, just to give myself the sort of mental separation. Otherwise I finish work in my home office and go downstairs and deal with my kids, and then like go back to work for a bit maybe. And I just think, you know, sometimes you need that that break, but it's also allowed us to, you know, hire staff or have staff that are fully remote. Certain roles, that's absolutely fine. We don't need people to be in the office all the time, and that's opened up, you know, much wider talent pool as well, which is, you know, amazing for us.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to hear you talk about those that went on mat leave in February and March time 2020, because on here we spoke a little bit about students graduating and coming into the workplace, and you know, suddenly being thrown into this, and everything being remote and flexible or hybrid. And how difficult that can be to make connections for new graduates, for instance, and trying to, you know, make sure that you integrate into your team and those sorts of things. Actually, you're absolutely right. Those that were already in an environment before and coming back to a completely different environment must have been completely alien to them.
Yeah, it really was. And, you know, thankfully they'd been here a long time. They knew enough people. It was easier, I suppose, to support them through that, and they could pick things up fairly quickly because they knew the core of the company already. Mm-hmm. We've certainly had a lot of new people join during times when we were locked down, working from home fully, and we had to really rethink how we onboarded new people and the support that we would give them and how to create those relationships. And we did a lot of stuff virtually, which worked for a while, and then everybody just got a bit fatigued by by talking to people on video call. But you know, you do what you can at the time. I would say, you know, going back to your point about students or, you know, graduates coming into the workplace and having to, you know, work more remotely, I'd say it's a real challenge for learning. So, you know, I think about myself coming in and how much you pick up through just osmosis. You're just watching and absorbing what other people are doing, the way that they carry themselves in a meeting with a client, or, you know, the way that they might put together a document or something like that, which is really very difficult to do without physically being with that person. You know, you try as much as possible to do that in virtual ways and spend more time on, you know, one-on-one through the screen, but I do think there's probably much more thinking we need to do as an industry about how we manage that for people coming in, because just in terms of development and progression, I think that's going to hamper, you know, the junior people coming in.
Yes, and even with the coming in and onboarding, and then also when that changes, I remember having a conversation with a lady about she worked in sales, and she she needed her graduates to then travel into the office. And she said that become a bit of a problem because when they joined, it was all remote. And then suddenly, because they're younger and they might not have that disposable income, they're really thinking about every single train ticket. Whereas some of us that used to commute into the city 5 days a week, you kind of get used to that season ticket loan disappearing every year, you just don't see it. But yeah, for younger people, it became quite a reality that actually, they're going to have to think about getting a monthly ticket or whatever it may be. And your pay suddenly changed as well. So there were lots of issues there, obviously.
Yeah, it is very expensive. It always has been very expensive, but obviously things are getting more expensive. I suspect as well, the stereotypical divide between the way millennials work and maybe some of the younger generations, and setting different boundaries. Yes. I don't think we've been very good at that in the past about, what you're willing to do for work versus your personal life.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and it's setting those boundaries, isn't it? And just making sure that both parties are very clear. What do you think the industry and organisations have done right so far?
So I guess, as I've alluded to a little bit, I think the introduction of more kind of flexible working has been a positive. So part-time working, remote, core hours, all of those things. And a better understanding and acceptance of the family and personal commitments is a big improvement. I think accommodating your employees' needs outside of just the working hours makes for a much happier staff base from my point of view, and that can help with productivity and retention, which obviously benefits the company as well. I think I'm seeing more and more women in senior roles, which is a massive positive. I think it's well established that having a balance of men and women in management creates a far better working environment. The balancing of those different skill sets and ways of working, empathy, listening, communication, collaboration, all of those things. Intentional increased visibility of women in the tech space. I think it's important to raise the profile of our women, not just as the token woman in a team or organization, but to really help illustrate what the opportunities are for other women. And we've had really great feedback actually from our new female employees, that when they've seen our female team members on our social channels or on our website, that's been a real draw, a real positive in terms of them making the decision to work for us. There are obviously organisations like yourself and Women in Tech and other organisations like that where they're making a great impact on the industry. And I think it's important for men to also engage with those spaces as much as possible. We're not trying to create a segregation of gender within tech at all, but you want that community to encompass, men, women, all gender expressions, and all be kind of supporting each other. And then I think working groups within companies has, from my point of view anyway, it's been really positive. So I had a women's network within AKQA, and we have the Great Women community at Great State now. So we meet regularly and discuss, any issues that we're facing or things we want to focus on. We might bring in external speakers or trainers that can support us, and we try and involve the men in the company as much as possible to sort of help encourage that male allyship and not create that segregation.
Yes, because I think it's quite easy to, when you mention it to somebody, a male colleague, for instance, or, we're having a network meetup and it's women in tech. I've occasionally had that eye roll where they go, oh. And you think, but it's not, as you say, it's not a separate thing. You are invited, come along and hear, it's not a room full of ladies complaining. It's how do we move forward the whole industry in terms of improving diversity for all. And I think once a lot of male colleagues hear that, they think, oh, actually, there's something I can do to help here. And it's far better for the entire team to have better diversity representation than, just a few ladies all coming together and thinking that they're, just having an hour on their own talking about something
just
that is
in there slating men all day, like
that's it. Yeah, you get that look. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think when we first started the group, we actually started it off the back of International Women's Day 2021, I think it was, where I was just like, I just don't want to do anything gimmicky that is a one-off, like social post about International Women's Day and it's just a token gesture or whatever. I want to do something that lives forever. So we could, every month we're doing something and we're, you know, progressing the way that we are thinking about things, or, you know, the experience or training or support or whatever it is that we're doing. So we've done multiple things over the year. You know, memberships for our staff in Women in Tech and going to conferences and bringing in speakers and stuff, but even just having this community to talk to other people who have gone through similar things that they have, or the things that they're worried about, that with the best will in the world, men can't understand or really comment that much on, because they haven't gone through the same things or been treated in the same way.
Yeah.
But that's certainly not to say that we don't want to involve them in any way. And we've done things like have external speakers from Women in Tech, for example, to talk about what they do and how, you know, what information they can provide and how men can get involved in that. We've had unconscious bias training for the whole company. So, you know, that's just not a men thing. Like, you shouldn't just give that to, that's an everyone thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, we you know, we're coming up with things that we can focus on, but it's definitely something that we want men involved in too.
Yeah, and there's obviously lots going on, as you mentioned. There's lots of training available, if you're lucky enough to be a company that's really pushing forward, as you said, not with the one thing that you do once a year as the gimmick, but actually, you know, the intention to make change within the company all year round. But why do you think the women in tech statistics are still so low?
I think there are probably a few reasons. One, that when we're starting out in our careers, we're not aware of what the opportunities are, and probably not presented with the wider roles and careers that maybe men are. I know, of course, more is being done to bring young girls into STEM areas, and that's brilliant, and we need more of that. You know, I love the fact that my daughter says there aren't boy jobs and girl jobs. They're not boy toys or girl toys. Like, you know, it's all, well, everybody can do anything, you know, and that, you know, absolutely love that. We need to be introducing that way of thinking to young children, so it just becomes the norm. And I think, you know, you need to be reaching out to schools and colleges and universities to show students the opportunities as soon as possible. As I said, you know, a lot of that I felt was missing from my education. If you didn't want that traditional career path of doctor, lawyer, teacher, office worker, whatever, there just was no information provided. And, you know, as I said, I was lucky. I had more privilege than some in terms of, you know, those were career possibilities to be a doctor. But if you're in an area of, you know, socioeconomic disadvantage, you may not even be presented those as options. So what information are they getting? I think as organisations, we could do far more to highlight how to get into those careers, the steps you can take, you know, what progression there might be, how much it might cost to be trained, or is there any opportunity to get funding for any of that? And I think we need to do far more than offer unpaid internships, which, you know, can only really work for those that are already more affluent and privileged. So you're only ever going to get the same type of people. I think, or I suspect, and this is only my opinion, of course, that women can be put off certain careers, or maybe from progressing to a more senior level because of wanting to start a family and not feeling like maybe they can do both things. And that could either be their own personal concerns, or it could be an actual blocking of progression or opportunities within the company they're working for, down to discrimination. I think, though, tech is probably one of the more accommodating careers for flexible working, given that more, you know, more can be done remotely. It can be very efficient and productive to work in that way. That being said, the more senior you are and the more responsibility you have, the more challenging that work-life parenting balance becomes. It shouldn't mean that it's not an option, though. It just means organisations need to find better ways of accommodating it and more ways to support women to progress. I guess.
It's interesting that you said about, the company being supportive there, because I only spoke to a lady on here recently who said when she wanted to become a parent, she was petrified of what it was going to do to her career. And she said, she left it, and then she got pregnant, and then she left it until sort of the legal amount of time she had to say. And she said, when I told my company, nobody minded. She said, I think it was all in my mind. But she was petrified because she really thought it was going to have a knock on. But luck would have it, she was at a very supportive company. And I think it's just, making sure that the company that you're at works for you at that point in your life as well, because your life changes. As you mentioned right at the beginning, it used to be everybody was young and single, and and I always felt like I worked at a company where we had a very big sales team, and that was the sales team. Everybody was young and single and wanted to stay out late and wanted to schmooze with clients. And obviously people's lives change, and that sales team grew up, and that is no longer their lifestyle. But yes, you're absolutely right. It's just making sure you're in with the right company at the right time that can really support you. And tech is a really great way, a great industry to be in, that can really help you be flexible. You would hope it would be flexible. It's technology, but I'm sure there are those companies that are not.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? I think it should, it definitely should be one of those industries where flexibility is like built in from the beginning. I think certainly, I think we're probably more progressive than some of those traditional industries, like maybe in financial services, insurance, law, those sorts of things. And because we are sort of naturally reviewing and responding to trends from a strategic and tech perspective, that sort of trickles down into our working processes and things like that. And I think certainly anecdotally within like my friendship group, some of those that work in those more traditional areas have seen more struggles in terms of flexible working or remote working, and that's even with the changes the pandemic brought about. That being said, I don't think you can generalize too much, because I've also had friends who work in digital whose management are adamant that everyone needs to be in the office 5 days a week, because there is that lack of trust we've talked about, or just because they personally don't like working from home. And so that just says more about the attitude of sort of individuals rather than necessarily highlighting industry sort of specific trends. So that's why, like you said, it's so important to find a company whose sort of ethos and values align with yours, and can facilitate that environment that works for you.
So what more needs to be done in the future to increase diversity and inclusion in the tech industry, do you think?
So as I've alluded to, I think we need to start young, start early, and engage kids at school. So partnership programs between businesses and education providers, for example, I know there are some things that already happen. There's like Beam a Digital Day, for example, but I think there's always more that can be done with things like that. And I know, most cities will have some sort of youth engagement program, which can be contacted and kind of make sure doors are opening for local children. We actually work with an organisation called Babassa in Bristol, who support underrepresented young people, and they'll help with developing their skills and help with recruitment and sort of help contact or connect businesses with young people, provide training and things. They also provide training for organizations, so they're the ones that gave us the unconscious bias training, and which has been really interesting, really useful, and you see how you can actually implement some changes or different ways of working. I think they're looking at maybe programs for women coming back to work after maternity leave, for example, so to develop new skills or change careers would be a good idea. There is a program called Digital Mums, but I think that focuses largely on social media management. But it'd be awesome to see more of those types of programs for things like coding or other skills. They may well exist and I'm just not aware. So if that's the case, then more awareness would be great of those sorts of things, and how businesses can maybe support people coming back from maternity in those areas. I also think we need far better and more focused recruitment strategies to better source candidates from wider pools, advertising in tech spaces that are specifically aimed at women. I think I've seen real up and down over the years in terms of the volume of women in leadership, for example, and that's just gender, that's not even touching on any of the other lack of diversity. And I've seen, a whole raft of senior women leaving a business for lots of different reasons, not necessarily negative reasons, but then kind of organically being backfilled with men. Not on purpose, just in terms of like the candidates that they've seen. And that can really shift the dynamic of a management team. And that's not that positive. And, of course, I'm not slating men. It's not anything to do with that. You need to make sure you're recruiting the best people, for the roles. But if we don't try harder in our recruitment to find a good balance by recruiting in the right places and changing the way you write your job descriptions and making sure you've got a balanced interview panel, then you're, real serious risk of having a white middle class male workforce, which doesn't represent the wider society, and it really doesn't lend itself to creativity or innovation or diversity of thought or all those things that are really, really important. And I guess more best, we should be striving for better gender representation on websites, on social, in language that we use, in imagery that we use, not just gender but other areas of diversity too. And I guess finally, from my point of view, I think the world of work is changing, and younger generations coming up now, they don't think about their careers in the same way that I did, for example. It seems like far more likely they'll have multiple careers and they'll find new ways of working flexibly that work for them. I think as an industry, we really need to pay attention to that and adapt, and we don't have to maintain the status quo. We might find better ways of doing things, and that will only make the working situation better for everyone. So I think we need to be paying attention.
Yeah, you are right, because I think when we joined the workforce years ago, you were almost sort of trained to think, well, I go in and I do that job and then I work my way up, and you never really move around. And you tend to go into a job where you have something in your mind's eye, and that's what it's going to be in 20 years. I'm going to be a manager or whatever it may be. Yeah. And I think nowadays there really is that freedom of that just that mindset of a younger person who can just jump from job to job and it'd be fine. Because we had a lady on here a few weeks ago, and she said when she joined for a particular role, thinking, well, one day she'll have children. And this would have been way down the line. She was thinking, I need to be in tech and I need to be in a flexible role, and I don't want to be too senior because in 15 to 20 years, I definitely want to be a mother, and I should work myself into that position where it's going to be easier for me. And she said, by the time I actually got to that, she said, I'd completely changed roles several times. I had such a different mindset. She said, you can't go into the industry thinking what you're going to be doing in the next 15 to 20 years, because everything changes. And as we've mentioned, tech changes incredibly fast. But I think you're right that students coming in nowadays, they change jobs, every sort of 3 to 5 years. And there's no boundary there. They just think, I'll try something new.
Yeah, it's incredible, really. I mean, it's incredible that woman had the foresight, 15, 20 years ago to think like that. And I was like, yeah, whatever, let's just go and try this job out. So yeah, that's impressive. But you're right. I think that certainly for me, there's a real nervousness around changing careers. How would it work if I did something completely different? And that might be, my personality anyway. But certainly it seems like younger people, there's a load of careers that didn't exist, back when I was first starting out, and that will continue to be the case, I imagine. But yeah, there seems to be much more willingness to try new things and to adapt, and just think that things are more transferable, skills are more transferable, and you don't have to stick down that sort of very closed route.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time. As you can tell, we can keep talking about this all morning, but we are out of time. So thank you so much, Jinny, for coming in and sharing your story with us. We really appreciate it.
No worries at all. Thank you for having me. It was great.
Thank you. And for everybody listening, as always, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.